You might at some point ask yourself, how many continents are there? Some, like the Olympics, will say 5: Europe, America, Oceania, Africa, and Asia. Most will say 7: Europe, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Oceania, and Antarctica. Others will say 6, excluding Antarctica. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I will show you an alternative way of dividing the world into continents. I really dislike the current way we divide the world into continents. On one side you have Europe as one continent, where most of the continent uses the same currency and where most people speak Germanic, Romance or Slavic languages. These languages are all part of the Indo-European language family. And on the other side you have Asia, containing half of the human population and an enormous share of the world's land area. Not to mention a whole array of different languages, language families, cultures, ethnicities, religions, etc. In short, we have one relatively small, relatively homogeneous region and one huge and diverse region, both being called a continent. The general definition of a continent is a large landmass separated by a large body of water. But this general definition of a continent does not fit with the generally agreed upon set of continents. For example, Africa and Asia are divided by the man-made Suez Canal. They should not be separate continents by this definition, as the Suez Canal is not a large body of water. The same goes for North and South America, which are split by this Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is not a large body of water, and by the general definition, the Americas should be considered one continent. Furthermore, Europe and Asia aren't even separated by water, they are separated by the Ural Mountains. This leaves us with one giant Afro-Eurasian continent alongside the Americas and Oceania. Furthermore, some will say that Oceania is too small to be considered a continent, as most of it consists of the island of Australia. This leaves us with two absolutely enormous continents, something which renders the word continent useless, as it only describes two land masses. I believe that there is a better way of dividing the world into continents, one that does not end up with half of the human population on one continent. I think that in order to get a set of continents which can make more sense and be more practical than the current ones, one has to stop asking where there is land and where there is water, and instead ask who lives there. What languages do they speak? What histories do they share? And then one can concern oneself with natural geography. I am not the first who thought of this. Atlas Pro, a channel I highly recommend, created a video exploring a geographical approach to redefining continents. Atlas Pro's definition consists of two parts. 1. A continent is a landmass bigger than the landmass containing only one georegion, i.e. Greenland, consisting entirely of glaciers. 2. If a bisecting line can be drawn through anywhere on a continent that passes through only a single bioregion, it is coming to an end. Then the continent ends where the single region becomes its thinnest. This definition gives us North and South America, Oceania, Africa and Eurasia. He then creates a new measuring system that is smaller than a continent to further divide Eurasia into segments like Europe, West Asia, Greater Persia, the Indian subcontinent and the rest of Asia. What I don't like about this definition is that it creates a two-tier definition of a continent that doesn't include the islands around the mainland, such as the Mediterranean islands, the British Isles, Madagascar, Japan, New Zealand and Tasmania, etc, etc. Although I really like Atlas Pro's model in broad strokes, I want to take a different angle, which takes a more human-centric approach, focusing more on people living in different continents. The main problem with using the general definition of a continent, or Atlas Pro's definition of a continent, is that Europe should be part of Asia. This makes sense as Europe is not separated from Asia by ocean, although if we look back at the continents it has formed a consensus around, Europe is always considered a continent. So instead of inventing a new definition of what a continent is, I will instead say that Europe is a continent, and from there divide the world into areas that are similar to Europe. In Europe you have the EU, which is the most important organization in the region. It helps different European nations cooperate, and its member states make up the vast majority of both the population and surface area of Europe. While the EU does not include the entire continent, the EU and Europe are in many contexts seen as synonymous. I will therefore look for organizations and other structures around the world that are similar to the EU, those that in many ways could represent a continent regardless of how a continent is defined. Organizations in the world that are similar to the EU include Mercosur, the African Union, and ASEAN. I will also include India and the United States. Both of these countries has a structure that is similar to the structure of the European Union, and they are often compared to the EU. I will also include the Arab League. It is not as unified or integrated as India or the EU, but it does consist of a continent-sized region where most of the people speak the same language, even if the different dialects of Arabic are not always mutually intelligible. I will be using these regions as a starting point from which I can make regions that one would call continents. I will be starting with Europe, as Europe is already established as a continent, and the continent I am using as a blueprint to map the other continents. So showing off my thought process in Europe will help explain my thought process in other areas which might not be as familiar and who are often not considered continents, even though they should be. Probably. Furthermore, I will also take into account natural geography. This means no exclaves. Each continent should be geographically continuous on land. Secondly, islands are included in the continent they have the strongest ties to. In summary, I will look at an area's language, economy, history, geography when deciding which continent the area belongs to. Europe is defined by the Romance, Germanic, and Slavic branches of the Indo-European language family. The European continent includes EU countries and other countries closely tied to the EU through the Schengen area and the Eurozone. Europe also includes EU candidate countries like Ukraine, Georgia, Turkey, and the Western Balkans. The UK is a former EU member and therefore included in Europe. Although not part of the Union now, the UK still has strong ties with Europe and cooperates a lot with the continent. Therefore, it makes sense to include the UK in Europe. Europe also includes Russia and Belarus due to cultural and linguistic roots. Both nations have played an important role in European history for centuries. Most people in both countries speak Russian or Belarusian, which are East Slavic languages connecting them to Europe, as the Slavic languages are one of the three main language families found in Europe. Some might say that Europe should end at the Ural Mountains, as this is a natural land border, and I would agree with them if Russia did not extend all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. But because Russia is also on the east side of the Ural Mountains, and there are Russians speaking a European language, i.e. Russian, on the east side of the Ural Mountains, this area is also considered a part of Europe. Armenia and Azerbaijan are linked with Europe because of their shared history with the continent. In particular, Armenia has a European identity through their Christian faith. Azerbaijan is European through its close ties with Turkey, whom we have already established is a European country. Arabia is a new continent using the Arab League as an outline. The continent is bound together by the Arabic language and centuries of shared history. Arabia includes North Africa and much of what is usually known as the Middle East. Israel is also included here due to it being surrounded by other countries in Arabia, and most people in Israel speaking Hebrew, a Semitic language related to Arabic, or at least in the same language family. Of course, not everyone in these countries identify as Arab, but Arabic and a shared history provide a strong unifying thread among all these countries. Palestine and Western Sahara are also included as they are surrounded by other countries in Arabia, and the Arabic language also has a strong preference in these countries. Djibouti and Somalia, while Arabic League members, are grouped with Africa due to local languages having a stronger presence there than Arabic. These countries would also break the no exclaves rule. The African Union covers all of Africa. The continent is extremely diverse, with deep pre-colonial civilizations and a shared post-colonial struggle that unites many regions politically and culturally today. In my new definition of Africa, Africa consists of what is usually known as Africa, i.e. the landmass separated from Eurasia by the Suez Canal, minus the area in Arabia. I think that one should reconsider how we traditionally divide the Americas. Rather than using the Panama Canal as the boundary between North and South America, a more meaningful division might be the Mexican-American border. This shift reflects a major linguistic divide. English dominates the north while Spanish prevails in the south. These language patterns are rooted in colonial history. Spain colonized most of the southern regions of the Americas, while England and later the United States expanded throughout the north. The concept of the Great Divergence also supports this rethinking. It highlights the widening economic gap between the so-called developed world and the rest. When we examine a map of GDP per capita in the Americas, the United States and Canada clearly stand apart from Latin America and the rest of the Americas, with a few notable exceptions in and around the Caribbean. Linguistically, Latin America is overwhelmingly shaped by Romance languages, particularly Spanish and Portuguese, direct legacies of Iberian colonialization. In contrast, the linguistic landscape of the North is dominated by English, a Germanic language. While exceptions exist, like Quebec in Canada, this division better reflects both the linguistic and economic realities shaped by colonial history. With this in mind, it seems more logical to refer to the northern continent as North America or Northern America, and the southern one as Latin America, in recognition of the dominant Latin-based languages spoken there. Alternatively, the term Mercosur could be used in the same way we sometimes refer to Southeast Asia as ASEAN. This naming shift offers a clearer and more culturally and economically grounded way to understand the Americas. India, combined with the Indian subcontinent and nearby islands, forms the continent of India. The Indian subcontinent is a linguistic mosaic, home to Indo-Aryan languages such as Hindi and Bengali, and the Dravidian language family, which includes languages like Tamil and Telugu. This linguistic diversity, combined with shared cultural and historical ties, justifies its consideration as a distinct continent. East Asia, including China, Korea, Japan, and nearby regions, form another continent based on linguistic and cultural ties. The Sino-Tibetan language family, which includes Mandarin Chinese and Tibetan, as well as Japanese and Korean. This language family has unique scripts and linguistic features that set them apart from other languages. The cultural and historical interactions within East Asia, facilitated by these languages, justify its consideration as a distinct continent. Although I generally prefer a human-centric approach to dividing the world into continents, I really think it makes sense to define Oceania as its own continent, primarily because it makes sense geographically. So I will define Oceania as consisting of Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Micronesia, Polynesia and Melanesia, and perhaps the rest of the Pacific islands that are not more connected to another continent. Furthermore, I would also include the eastern islands of Indonesia in Oceania, as they are part of the same bioregion as the rest of Oceania. Atlas Pro made another video about this, which you should check out. Links are in the description. Finally, we have Inner Asia, a region often overlooked. The continent of Inner Asia includes Iran, the remaining countries in Asia, the 3 western provinces of China, i.e. Inner Mongolia, East Turkestan, also known as Xinjiang, and Tibet. Inner Asia also includes the 2 western provinces of Pakistan, Balochistan, and the province which I will refer to as Pashtunistan because of the Pashtun people living in this province, which is a people group that is connected to other peoples in Inner Asia. The Azerbaijani provinces of Iran have stronger cultural ties to European Azerbaijan than to the rest of Iran, which is why I will include these provinces in Europe rather than Inner Asia. These regions have unique cultural and linguistic ties to people outside of East Asia and India, which is why I have included them in Inner Asia as opposed to other continents. Inner Asia, with its diverse ethnic groups and rich history, deserves recognition as a distinct continent. It is home to the Turkic, Iranian and Mongolic language groups. The continent of Inner Asia overlaps heavily with the geographic region of Inner Asia, which is no coincidence. When I first started making this map, I found it hard to place any of these countries and regions in a single continent because they share histories with most of their neighbors. So perhaps it is fitting that this region is its own continent instead of constantly being grouped together with others. I will now do a quick review of the 10 continents in this model. We have Europe, Africa, Arabia, North America, Latin America, India, East Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania and Inner Asia. Some of these regions might have a different name. So Europe might be called the European Union, Africa the African Union, Arabia the Arab League, North America might be called USNA or Northern America, Latin America might be called Mercosur, India maybe be referred to as the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia could be referred to as ASEAN. It is, in my opinion, that this human-centered model reflects our world more accurately, honoring language, culture and shared history without cramming over half of the population into one Asia. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially on Arabia and Inner Asia, which were the hardest to define. Drop your suggestions in the comments. I am also interested in making a follow-up video where I go into detail on each of the continents and respond to your suggestions and feedback. This project is meant to spark conversation, not erase complexity or identity. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next video. Until next time, stay curious. Until next time, stay curious. Until next time, stay curious. Curious. Until next time, stay curious. Until next time, stay curious.